In this video, I would like to speak a little bit more about the cycle analysis at the foot of our charts, and in particular what we call the diamond notation that Hurst defined when he published his cycles course in 1970. The diamond notation, of course, consists of these diamonds at the foot of the chart. As I have already mentioned in a previous video, these diamonds mark the position of the troughs of the various cycles. And because of the principle of synchronicity, which tells us that the troughs in the market are synchronized, these diamonds tend to form these vertical stacks, indicating the synchronized troughs. Of course, the diamonds are color-coded according to the colors that are provided in this table at the top left of your chart. And so the magnitude of a particular cycle trough can be determined by looking at the highest diamond in the stack of diamonds. In this case, a yellow diamond tells us that this is a trough of the 40-week cycle. And over here we have a green diamond telling us that this is a trough of the 80-day cycle that has been found in the analysis. The other aspect of the diamond notation are these circles and whiskers. I've already explained in a previous video that the circle is positioned at the exact time at which the next trough of that cycle would be expected to form in the market on the basis of the calculation of the recent wavelength. In other words, the indicator takes a look at the past analysis, calculates the recent wavelength of that particular cycle, and then determines when the next cycle trough is expected. That circle is then plotted at that time. The lines that extend to each side of the circle are plotted to span a reasonable period of time in which that cycle trough could be expected. We know, of course, that there is the principle of variation, which tells us that the wavelengths of these cycles are constantly varying. The cycles are dynamic. And so the chances that this cycle is going to have exactly the same wavelength as the recent average wavelength is by no means 100%. And so we need to consider a range of time within which that cycle trough could occur. This combination of circle and line is called a circle and whiskers, and these circle and whiskers, of course, form these inverted triangles, or they are triangles that are standing on one of their points at the foot of our chart, and these were called by Hurst nests of lows. Nests of lows are very important because they tell us when we're expecting the next cycle trough of a particular magnitude to occur. I expect that by now none of that is new to you. What I wanted to discuss in this video is how you interpret that information. How do you use it? Many people are very fixed on these diamonds. Diamonds give us a great sense of confidence because they're in a nice straight line and they line up usually under important price troughs. And so that gives us a great deal of confidence. We feel as if though that must be really meaningful. Of course it is, but when we are going to make trading decisions, the diamonds are less important to us than these nests of lows. The nests of lows allow us to anticipate what is likely to happen on the basis of the analysis. And so I would encourage you to focus on these nests of lows as opposed to the diamonds. The diamonds are important, but the nests of lows are generally more important. Now, at the moment, these nests of lows, and this is a daily chart that we're looking at, these nests of lows are very neat. Let me explain what I mean by them being very neat. You can see that the circles are very much lined up above one another. In this nest of lows over here, the 40-day and 20-day circles are very neatly lined up above one another. And they are also very neat over here. They are very closely aligned, the 20-week all the way down to the 40-day cycle circles there. That is generally speaking a sign of an accurate analysis. In other words, it is a good analysis that we are seeing on our charts at the moment. That's great, and it gives us increased confidence in making trading decisions on the basis of this analysis. However, unfortunately, you are not always going to see neat nests of lows, so sometimes they are going to be a bit straggly. We're going to take a look at a few of those in a moment. So what this analysis is telling us now is that a trough of 80-day magnitude, note the green diamond over here, formed at this time, and there is that 80-day cycle trough. Now, the 80-day cycle on the daily chart is our sequence cycle, and so our sequence of A through H interactions between price and the signal cycle FLD will of course start from this point. You will notice immediately our A category interaction over here, projecting a target up here which has not yet quite been reached. Notice also that the signal cycle FLD is expected to provide support at this point. Notice the upward pointing arrows over there on the chart at about the time that the 20-day cycle, the pink cycle or signal cycle, is expected to form in the market. So the cycle analysis is telling us right now that price has bounced out of an 80-day cycle trough that formed over there. It headed up towards the 20-day cycle target, has not yet reached it, and now it is dropping down into a 20-day cycle trough. That is what we can gather from the daily chart. Let's step down to the next time frame, the 4-hour time frame, and see what information that time frame has for us. Here we are, and again, that is the 80-day cycle trough. Remember that, of course, the cycles are color-coded, and so the longest cycle on any chart is the yellow cycle, which in this case is, of course, the 80-day cycle. And so we have the same cycle trough that formed over here in early January. That 20-day cycle trough we were looking at on the daily chart is this nest of lows over here. And that trough is expected on about the 21st of January. I'm recording this video, as you can see, on the 17th of January, so we still have about 4 days to go until this 20-day cycle trough is expected to form. But now on the 4-hour chart, we have another nest of lows that is worth paying attention to. It is this one over here. Not quite as neat as the other nest of lows we were looking at. You can see those circles are slightly displaced from one another. That nest of lows is for the orange cycle, right? The orange cycle is the longest circle and whiskers that we see in the nest of lows. So that orange cycle is the 10-day cycle on our 4-hour chart. And so we were, of course, expecting a 10-day cycle trough to form at about the center of that nest of lows. In other words, it was expected probably early yesterday morning. Now let me answer a question that is often asked. When do these nests of lows turn into diamonds? And the answer to that question is a little complicated. It has to do with the cycle analysis that is performed. What the analysis process is doing is it is waiting for some confirmation that that trough has formed. Now, using our advanced human brains, we can look at this price action and we can see there's a low point over there. Possibly this 10-day cycle trough has formed over there. You can see the time is the 16th of January, 9 o'clock in the morning, and so very possibly that is the 10-day cycle trough. The indicator has not plotted diamonds there yet because it does not have confirmation that that trough has formed. That doesn't mean that the trough hasn't formed, but it does mean that we need to be aware of the fact that it might not have. You will notice an interesting thing if I remove those markings. That is that the whisker to the right of that 10-day cycle, circle and whiskers, indicating the end of the reasonable time in which we could expect that trough to occur, is actually slightly behind us. It is 2 bars behind us, as I think you can see, and so therefore that trough is now overdue. It is likely that that trough has formed, but it is not absolutely certain. This is unfortunately a reality of performing a cycle analysis of the financial markets. Certainty is a fairly rare commodity, so we are going to need to make trading decisions not on the basis of certainty, in other words, that that trough has definitely 100% formed, but on the basis of the fact that it is likely that that trough has formed. This is something that is going to become second nature to you as you trade with the FLD indicator. Notice, as a matter of interest, a clue that that cycle trough might have formed in the fact that the 5-day cycle target was achieved at the time that that trough was expected. I will be speaking more about these targets and what it means when they are achieved and what it means when they are not achieved in a later video. But let's step down to the next shorter time frame, which is the 1 hour time frame. And here you will notice an interesting thing. First of all, the 10-day cycle trough has now been found in this analysis. There it is. It is the blue-colored cycle, the 10-day cycle, and that trough has been positioned with diamonds over there. However, notice our nests of lows on this chart. Here we have a fairly neatly aligned combination of the 2-day and 1-day circles. But here we have an interesting situation where we have this green cycle circle, which is a 5-day cycle, floating above this 1-day circle. Where is the 2-day circle and whiskers that should be a part of that nest of lows? The answer to that is that, in fact, this green cycle, circle and whiskers, actually belongs to this nest of lows. Here we have a situation where, by having positioned the 10-day cycle trough over here, we have a bit of an anomaly in our analysis. Notice too that the 2-day cycle trough that has been positioned over there is under this rather unremarkable cycle trough. It is the position of this 2-day cycle trough over there that is causing this displaced nest of lows. This situation is easily resolved for us because we do not worry too much about the displaced nest of lows in the future, or at least the part of the displaced nest of lows in the future, and we focus rather on the fact that we are expecting this 5-day cycle trough to occur within this range of time. You can see there was an interesting trough over there and another one over there. Both of those are potentially the 5-day cycle trough that we are now expecting. Before we step down to the next shorter time frame, I would like to point out some other evidence that the 5-day cycle trough indeed might have formed. Notice these targets over here, the 2-day cycle target and the 5-day cycle target from this hourly chart and also from the 4-hour chart are all focused on this bar over here, or they were all achieved on that bar, I should say. And that was just within the range of reasonable time for this 5-day cycle trough. It is quite possible, therefore, that this 5-day cycle trough has indeed formed. So let's step down to the next shorter time frame, which is the 30-minute time frame. And on the 30-minute time frame, you can see that we do now have a confirmed 5-day cycle trough. That blue diamond over there represents the 5-day cycle, and that trough has been found at this position, which was the position we were looking at just a moment ago. Here are those targets from the longer time frames. They are, of course, grey in color because they come from the different time frames. Notice how on this chart, the analysis anomalies that we were considering in the longer time frame chart have been resolved, and you will find this happening as you step down through the different time frames, because each time frame chart has to make some decisions about the analysis. It will resolve that analysis. And your job is then to look at that resolved analysis, decide whether you are confident in it and happy to trade on the basis of it. There are a few things here that increase my confidence in this analysis. In particular, I like it when I see a target that is achieved at the top of a movement. You will notice that is a 1-day cycle target. We have this 5-day cycle trough positioned over here, and we have a good and very clean move up to that target. Then price came down and it has formed an M shape for that 1-day cycle. The orange colored cycle on this chart is the 1-day cycle. That clean M shape is looking very good to me. It's not a very bullish M shape, I should point out, but nevertheless it is a good, clean analysis for us to start making trading decisions on the basis of. A few other things to point out. We have a neat nest of lows here for this 2-day cycle trough, although there is a displaced circle for the 2-day trough itself. Again, that 2-day trough is then floating above this 12-hour cycle trough. And so we have 2 periods of time to focus on. The one is the actual nest of lows, which is over here, and the other is this rather staggered, not complete nest of lows, which is a warning that potentially that might be an important time to watch. Let's step down to the next time frame, the 15-minute time frame. I hope you are seeing, as we step through each of these time frames, how the analysis is refined to a greater and greater detail so that we can work with the information that we need on the time frame that we're trading, which of course we'll be speaking about in the trading module. The 15-minute time frame doesn't give us very much additional information. Here is the 1-day cycle trough that we saw on the 30-minute chart. And here we have our A category interaction with our signal cycle, which is our 6-hour cycle on the 15-minute chart. Price is now moving up to the 6-hour cycle target. Let's step down to the 5-minute chart. Here again we get that extra detail in the price action. This is the 1-day cycle trough that was found on the 30-minute chart. I think I'm correct in saying it was initially found on the 30-minute chart. It is of course our yellow cycle on this chart. And here you can see a few targets providing us with extra detail. There the 3-hour target has been achieved right up at the top of that 3-hour cycle move, because here is the next 3-hour cycle trough. That looks like a good, fairly bullish price action, which is what we would hope to see as price bounces out of the 1-day cycle trough. Notice the good clean M shape. Let's consider our interactions quickly between price and the FLD. Of course, we aren't displaying the FLD all the way back into the past, but it was fairly obvious that that FLD was crossed somewhere over here. That's our A category interaction. It looks as if the price reached up and achieved its target, although that target is in the past, so we're no longer tracking it. Here was a moment of weakness in the market as price dropped down below the signal FLD in a B category interaction as it formed this first 100-minute cycle trough. But it recovered as it bounced out of that trough, and there is our C category interaction as it crossed back up above the FLD. Usually, of course, we would expect a BC category interaction pair, but particularly when you are looking at the shorter time frames, and this is a 5-minute time frame, you will often get that separated B and then C category interaction. That C category interaction took us up to our 3-hour cycle target in a very neat fashion, and then of course price came down and crossed below the FLD on its way down to the 3-hour cycle trough. That would be a D category interaction, and then as price bounced out of our 3-hour cycle trough, we had our E category interaction. Price has now achieved the 100-minute cycle target. It still has the 6-hour cycle target just above us. Here is the 6-hour cycle target from the 15-minute chart. Remember, our multiple time frame targets will often cluster fairly close together to each other in terms of price, but not absolutely on top of each other. So we're approaching that target, haven't quite achieved it yet. But to get back to our diamond notation, what are we expecting? Here we had our 1-day cycle trough marked by diamonds. Here is our 3-hour cycle trough marked by diamonds. Here is a good nest of lows for our 6-hour cycle trough. And of course, we're expecting an intermediate 100-minute cycle trough in between. We can take a look using our crosshairs and see that we are expecting that 100-minute cycle trough in just under an hour. And this 6-hour cycle trough we are expecting in about 2.5 hours. Finally, for the sake of completeness, let's step down to our 1-minute chart. Here is that 3-hour cycle trough that you can see that was found on the 5-minute chart, and there it is again on this 1-minute chart. Notice the 100-minute cycle target that was achieved over here. Price dipped down, not actually quite as low as that, so that's an interesting example of the cycle trough displaced slightly from the actual price low. This was a slightly lower low, as I think you can maybe see. Of course, this chart is already moving away from my drawings. But the important message that we see on this chart in terms of the diamond notation on the chart is that we have a 50-minute cycle trough that is expected about over here. Let's just see where that is. It's pretty much about now. It's in a few minutes from now. And notice what is happening with the interaction with the FLD. Here is our C category symbol. That is because price was expected to find support at the level of the signal cycle FLD here. So this would have been labeled a B category interaction if we were labeling our interactions in the past, which we're not at the moment on this chart. But this was the B category interaction as price came down, just dipped below the FLD, and now of course it is trying to get back up above it in the C category interaction. It has, however, achieved these targets, as you can see, a very nice, neat cluster of targets on its way up. The fact that it exceeded those targets is an indication of bullishness, and that is something we're going to be discussing in the next video, where I'm going to be speaking in a little more detail about what it means when a target is achieved and what it means when it is not.